being heterodox, being against the grain, anti-woke, being the black guy who said the thing that black guys are not supposed to say. You can inhabit that persona to such an extent that your judgment is undermined by it. And I take that as a warning. I mean, I'll accept what you say. No, we didn't, do anything wrong. But I'm still a little bit chastened.
Well, Glenn, we need to talk about this is very important, the George Floyd issue, because our statements about George Floyd have stirred a lot of people to watch a certain documentary. And now there's been a response to the documentary. And we need to, what's the word smart people use? We need to contextualize Radley Balko's journalistic sleuthing in response to the documentary. What do you think?
Okay, let me try to set it up then. So the documentary is called The Fall of Minneapolis. J.C. Chase and Liz Collins, Minneapolis conservative journalist filmmaking crew. Let's tell the police side of the story of what went down in the killing of George Floyd, including the trial of Derek Chauvin, the police officer who had his knee on Floyd's neck. And it's an expose that alleges that Chauvin was convicted on flimsy evidence and through a biased court and process, and that he, in effect, is wrongly imprisoned in a federal prison in Arizona for the murder of George Floyd. Didn't kill George Floyd. You and I invited the filmmakers onto the show after we had discussed the film ourselves in a separate episode. That episode went viral. It got over 1.5 million views, and it drove a lot of traffic to the site where the film was being projected at YouTube. And then we had the filmmakers on, and we questioned them about some of the discrepancies. We indeed had heard from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison about this film, about our depiction of the film.
Which led both of us to have some serious questions. Too.
And we, did some due diligence in looking into some of the things and shared with our audience what Ellison was saying, confronted the filmmakers with questions about it and so on. So we were involved in the discussion of the film and indeed put up posts with thumbnails like, "We were lied to," or words to that effect, John, because they were your words in that particular instance, that the narrative that came out of the killing of Floyd and the reality of what actually happened up there were not the same. Okay. Coleman Hughes also has picked up, the young Coleman Hughes podcaster, Coleman's Corner, Conversations with Coleman, took this up and put up a big piece at Barry Weiss's newsletter in which he took up the question of whether or not Derek Chauvin was rightly convicted of murder of George Floyd, decided in the negative and made the case based on the film, largely, that case was wrongly decided against Chauvin. And in reaction to Coleman, Radley Balko, now can I describe him properly? He's a veteran crime and policing reporter, was with the Washington Post for a long time. You want to add to that, John?
I don't know that much about him, but he's an established name. He's a respected figure, by no means some sort of marginal partisan. And he has begun a very detailed response to Coleman's piece, and by extension, us. But he's taking Coleman's piece as the demonstration case for his purposes. And so far, there's been one very lengthy post responding to the documentary, and he's promising more. For some reason in my head, it's 2 more pieces, but maybe it's more than that.
He is very hard on Coleman. He's got a snide, kind of dismissive tone. Coleman Hughes says he does his own research. Well, if he had done his own research, he would know the following. The following mainly being that the testimony of police leadership at the trial of Derek Chauvin to the effect that Chauvin was not deploying the standard technique of maximal restraint that the police officers of Minneapolis are trained to deploy. They testified that Chauvin was not in compliance with the maximum restraint technique. And the film alleges that that was false, that testimony was false. The film, in effect, accuses these persons of perjury because in the manual for police training, there's a photograph of a situation in which someone is kneeling on the back or shoulder or neck of the person being arrested in a manner very similar to that which Derek Chauvin was deploying with George Floyd.
Many people have leaned on the shoulder, which maybe extends into the neck of people. Chauvin has apparently done that many times and did exactly what he did with Floyd. Many people have used it, but the idea is to only use it quickly, like for, say, 30 seconds, as preparation to getting somebody into this hobble, which is a completely different thing and keeps them from being a harm to themselves, because Floyd needed to be restrained. So you're supposed to do that in order to snap somebody into the hobble, not to just hold them there on the street for minutes and minutes and minutes at a time. That's what I took, especially from Balko. They did not say that in the documentary, and that is extremely misleading. And I would be interested to know what the documentary maker's response to that is.
But what I mainly got out of it is the filmmakers were dishonest in their depiction of the situation because they left the testimony of the police personnel who were mainly trying to say Chauvin was off the reservation. His behavior was not consistent with the appropriate procedure. It made it look as if they were saying something different from what they, in the fullness of their full testimony, was saying. And what I took from that was was two things. Discrediting the filmmakers, but also indirectly discrediting people who took the filmmakers at face value, like me and you, and Coleman Hughes.
You know, Glenn, I think on this that I think we were within our rights to call attention to the documentary. I think that it's one thing to look at all of this blow by blow. It's another thing to look at what a conversation is supposed to be. And national conversations are sometimes messy. For that documentary, as well made as it is, just in the objective sense, to be out there and for good thinking, bien pensant people to simply ignore it because it was made by conservatives would not be the way conversations go. Somebody needed to call attention to it. And frankly, we were some of the only people who would do it and be able to make big enough a noise to get other people to look. Now, this is the problem. It may turn out to be that this one was made by conservatives who were not well-meaning or who were incompetent or came in with some sort of seamy bias. That may be the case, but that's not true of all conservatives. And I think that we needed to bring it in. And then if Balko comes and basically refutes what they're saying, he has done a service and we can move on. But for that documentary to sit there, gradually seen by more and more people, with various people thinking, well, that's the way it really went, to simply not respond, I think is not constructive. I feel enlightened by Balko's work here. And if I could roll the tape back, I wouldn't have been so forceful in saying we were lied to. And frankly, I've looked at it. I do some hedges. I say, if this thing is true, et cetera. But still, the takeaway from it is me saying, here we go again. It's more Trayvon, et cetera. But, that's the way it goes. I left the window open, but we are not wrong to have called attention to that piece of work. What's necessary is to refute it. And that's what.
Well, no, the question isn't, I don't think the question is should the film have been acknowledged and recognized. I think the question is how it's interpreted. And I think the question for us is, were we too credulous? Not that we should not have ignored it, but that we should have been more skeptical about it, particularly about its technical claims, which challenge the limits of our own expertise in terms of being able to evaluate them. So we're trusting filmmakers to a certain degree when we do that. All right, you may want to reply to that. Let me just say another thing before you do. I've been asking myself the question, how could I have been so, I almost want to say gullible? How could I have been so credulous? How could I have not had my guard up? And I think the answer is, well, I wanted a counter narrative to the dominant narrative about what happened to George Floyd and the subsequent developments of the summer of 2020. I didn't like that police station being allowed to be burned to the ground. I thought that the lionization of Floyd, the elevation of him to a heroic status, to the point that the president, then a candidate of the United States, could say, I'm talking about Biden, in 2020, that Floyd's death resonated. I'm not quoting him, but this was the effect on a global scale. There were demonstrations all over the world, Black Lives Matter and all of that. Even more resonantly than did, even more profoundly than did the killing of Martin Luther King in 1968. I hope I don't misquote here, but I definitely believe that President Biden said, then candidate Biden said something to that effect. It was a big deal. It was a big fucking deal, the killing of George Floyd. The country seized up on something. When the opportunity to question the narrative came along, I jumped at it, and perhaps incautiously so. That's what I want to say, which raises a question in my mind more broadly. Being heterodox, being against the grain, anti-woke, being the black guy who said the thing that black guys are not supposed to say, you can inhabit that persona to such an extent that your judgment is undermined by it. And I take that as a warning. I mean, I'll accept what you say. No, we didn't, do anything wrong. But I'm still a little bit chastened by Radley Balko's, and what he does to Coleman. People can read this and see for themselves. Coleman, the youngish, upstart, conservative Black intellectual, is really disquieting. I mean, he says he's way out over his skis. He says, he's a propagandist in so many words. And Barry Weiss takes a hit indirectly from Balko. What kind of outfit is she running over there? Is she subject to the same temptations that we are as we inhabit this role of anti-wokeness, to too quickly embrace something that we ought to think twice about before we jump?
Glenn, you're harder on us than I would be, actually. Frankly, the narrative about cop killings has been lies so often that I think I wasn't motivated by sitting in a heterodox groove and beginning to play the role. With all due humility, I check myself for that as much as I can. However, you can't always be 100% sure. And given how strong the pattern is of the stories of that kind being lies, I think I was quite reasonable in thinking, oh, good Lord, here's another one of these cases. I wouldn't be surprised given the pattern. It isn't that I had some brief where I wanted to, disprove the story of George Floyd. It's that I thought, oh no, because frankly, I had believed it like everybody else, but I was thinking, oh no, is this going to be another one of these things where what we saw was not, what we were told we were seeing was not what was actually going on. And I think what's important is this, Glenn. When Ellison wrote us with his, polite scorn, here's what really happened. Both of us went and looked at the whole report of that pulmonologist. Both of us watched it. I certainly watched the whole thing. And it worried us so much that we called those two people on. That's when we called them on. We asked them questions. By the end of it, we were not saying, we were right. Or at least I certainly wasn't saying it or thinking it. There was kind of a big question mark by the end of it. We did our job. And Glenn, remember, there's a kind of person, kind of people who sometimes would even think of themselves as being in our camp. Think about it. Where they would have gotten the emails from Ellison with that tone of his. You can tell he hates us, but he's trying to do a service. And they would have dismissed it. They would have said, oh, fuck him. Forget it. They wouldn't have wanted to dig in and keep going. We both, frankly, I'm going to pat us on the back. We both had the presence of mind to think, even if this person hates us, we need to look into this more. We did our job.